Bring it faster. The voice was low and hard, the kind that doesn't need to be loud to mean something, and it came from around the corner of the Korean-owned grocery on a west side strip in an Ohio city, where the November cold had already driven most people inside for the evening. Jake Holloway heard it, and Ridge felt it first. The Dutch Shepherd's stride changed before Jake's did, the dark, brindle body going tight and forward. And Jake came around the corner at a run already knowing. The way his particular training and his particular damage had always made him know things a half second before his eyes confirmed them. 3 men surrounded a woman in a shop doorway. One of them had her by the hair. She had not let go of her bag. In the next 12 seconds, the situation resolved in a way the 3 men had not anticipated. And what happened in the days after, what Jake Holloway uncovered about what had been happening on that strip for 8 months, and what a 76-year-old woman had been quietly enduring rather than worry her deployed grandson, would tear the roof off a protection racket that had been bleeding a neighborhood dry and thought it had nothing to fear. Stay with me to the end of this one, and if you're new to this channel, go ahead and subscribe now, because this is the kind of story we tell, and you'll want to be here for what comes next. To understand why a Navy SEAL was on that particular corner at that particular hour, you have to understand the way Jake Holloway managed the version of himself he had come home with. He had been to the kind of places that rearrange a person's nervous system without asking, and he had come back with a body that was always ready for a thing that was not happening. A mind that tracked every exit and every change in ambient sound and every face that didn't match the pattern of faces around it. In civilian restaurants, he sat with his back to the wall. He didn't sleep in the middle of the bed. He drove routes that let him see who was behind him. These were not choices. They were simply the shape his alertness had taken, and he had learned to live inside them without calling them by their name. The walk through the Korean commercial district on the city's west side was part of his routine, the way a perimeter check is part of a routine. Something he did at a fixed time, covering known ground, seeing who was where. He had been doing it for the 5 months since he came home, and he had stopped in at Sung's Market on the 3rd day, and Mi-rae had put a container of doenjang jjigae on the counter and told him the price, and said nothing else. And that had been the beginning of an arrangement that suited them both. She called him by his last name. He called her Miss Sung. They did not discuss either of their situations and understood each other perfectly. Ridge had come home with him from the teams, a brindled Dutch Shepherd, compact and fast, with the kind of training that made him calm in all the places that calm is hardest and alert in all the places that alert is necessary. He was not a soft dog, but he was a perceptive one, and he had attached himself to Jake's quiet and Jake's insomnia with the faithfulness of an animal who has decided a partnership is worth maintaining through whatever the night brings. He had a specific quality that Jake had come to rely on, which was that Ridge had never once, in 3 deployments and 5 months of city walking, given a signal that didn't mean something. When Ridge's stride changed on the corner of that street in November, Jake did not ask himself whether something was wrong. He was already running. Have you ever had a place that felt like home? A neighborhood, a block, a restaurant where someone knew your order and didn't ask too many questions? Tell me about it in the comments below. I read every one. The places that hold us are sometimes where we least expect to find them. The woman at the center of it was Mi-rae Sung, and she had come to this country from Busan in 1978 with her husband Jae-won and 2 suitcases and a commitment to be useful that had never once wavered in 46 years. She had opened Sung's Market in 1988, the year her son Philip was born, and the year Jae-won said they finally had enough to do it right. And she had run it through the neighborhood's good years and its hard years and the years when nothing much happened at all, through the Korean community's expansions and contractions, through 3 recessions and a flood and a fire in the building next door that nearly took the whole block. She had given credit to families who needed it, without making it a transaction, and she had stocked things other stores stopped carrying because the customers who needed them still existed and deserved to find them. And she had been the first call when someone on the strip needed advice because she had seen enough trouble and made it through enough of it to know the difference between the kind you could outlast and the kind that required a different approach. She was 76, and she was small, and she was the kind of person you noticed not because of her size, but because of her stillness, the unhurried way she moved through a space, the directness with which she met your eyes, the sense that she had decided long ago exactly what she was willing to be afraid of, and nothing on this street qualified. Jae-won was gone 12 years. Her son Philip lived in Atlanta. Her grandson Danny was 22 and currently a corporal in the Marine Corps, deployed to a place his letters described in careful, unrevealing terms. And she missed him the way you miss someone who is both the reason you work hard and the reason you worry. She had not told him about the man who had been coming to collect every Friday for 8 months. She would not have Danny carrying that from wherever he was. It was hers to carry. The man's name was Vincent Kane, and he did not collect the money himself. He sent a crew, rotating faces so that no single person could be identified as the consistent threat. But the message was always the same: a percentage of the week's register or there would be consequences. The kind that small shop owners did not want to be specific about. Some shops on the strip had paid. Some had paid and resented it and said nothing. Mireille Sung had refused 3 times and absorbed the consequences each time without a word to anyone outside the strip, because she was not going to be the woman who called the police and waited to see if the police were faster than whatever Kane sent next. And because she had survived harder things than this and intended to outlast this the way she had outlasted everything else, by not moving, by staying open, by holding the ground. Tonight they had escalated because a woman who would not be moved sometimes needs to be made an example of. She had not let go of her bag. That was the thing Jake saw when he came around the corner. 3 men, and the smallest of them had her by the hair. And Mireille Sung's hands were still on the strap of her grocery bag, knuckles pale, and she was looking not at the ground, but straight ahead, the way a person who has decided not to fall looks. Ridge reached the nearest man first, moving low and fast and silent. And the man who had been doing the threatening suddenly had a Dutch shepherd at his calf and a very specific problem that concentrated his attention away from the elderly woman entirely. Jake covered the other 2 in the seconds following with the particular economy of a man who has done this in worse light and worse conditions, and the whole engagement was over in the time it takes to explain it. By the time the police arrived, Jake had called already running. The 3 men were on the pavement, and Ridge was holding the perimeter with the easy confidence of a dog who has made a decision and is comfortable with it. And Mireille Sung was standing in her shop doorway, still holding her grocery bag because she had not let it go at any point. And she looked at Jake the way she always looked at him, which was directly and without drama, and she said his name. If you had been the one to pull those men off her, and then learned that this had been going on for 8 months, and that no one on that strip had been able to stop it, would you have walked away once the police came, or would you have stayed, stayed, or walked below? I read every comment. I mean it. Jake stayed. He stayed because Mireille told him, in the flat, quiet voice she used for everything, that the 3 men on the pavement were not the problem, that the problem was the man who sent them, that the man who sent them had been doing this on this strip and 2 other strips in this part of the city for the better part of a year, and that she had not said anything because she did not know who on the force Kane had purchased and who he hadn't. Jake was not a detective, and he had no badge, but he had something that mattered more in this specific situation, which was that he had spent a career identifying threat networks from incomplete information in resource-constrained environments. And that is precisely what a protection racket on a commercial strip is if you look at it from the right angle. He also stayed because Mireille finally told him about Danny, and because the specific sentence she used, that Danny didn't know, that Danny couldn't carry it from where he was a sentence that a man who had carried things from far away could not hear without doing something about it. He went building by building over the next 2 days, the way you go through a structure you don't fully have a map of, and he learned the shape of the thing. Mrs. Choi at the dry cleaner 3 doors down had been paying for 6 months. She had a booth in the back of her shop, the kind that keeps a family's receipts and its correspondence and its important papers. And Jake sat in it with her for 2 hours while she explained what she had watched happen to the strip and the 8 months since Kane's operation arrived. In the careful, level voice of a woman who grew up in a country where you learn to watch things carefully and say nothing wrong to the wrong person. Mr. Bake at the restaurant on the corner had been paying for the full 8 and had twice had his front window broken when a payment was late. He showed Jake the repair receipts, both of them dated within a week of a missed collection, and he said he had kept them because a man who keeps records is a man who has not completely surrendered. 4 other businesses on the strip and 2 on the adjacent street had paid at various points, some in cash, some in goods, all of them in silence because the silence was what Kane's operation required. None of them had thought they were the only one until Jake sat in each shop and asked, and none of them had known until Jake showed them the list he was building, that the problem was the size it was. Kane had operated with the confidence of a man who counted on his victims staying isolated, each believing they were alone, each calculating that speaking up was a private risk with no collective benefit. He had not counted on a man who had once mapped insurgent networks for a living and who had a particular personal reason not to stop at this particular shop. The visible evidence came together the way evidence does when you know what to look for. The pattern of payments, the dates of the window breakings, the description of the rotating crew, the two shops that had stopped paying and then suddenly been burglarized, the text messages two of the business owners had kept on their phones. Mrs. Choi had a notebook. She had been writing it all down, dates and amounts and faces, in case it ever mattered. Jake held the notebook in his hands and thought about what it cost a woman who runs a dry cleaner to keep a notebook like that for 6 months without telling anyone. And he called a detective he trusted, a city detective named Hartley, who had been after Kane for a different matter and whose career would benefit from what Jake was holding. And he told him what he had. The reckoning came on a Friday. Because Kane's operation collected on Fridays, Vincent Kane sent his lieutenant this time, a man named Dez, who was smarter than the three from the corner and had always been careful to keep physical distance from the direct acts, and Dez came to Sung's Market with the expectation that last week's interruption had been a complication and that this week would be normal, because the people on this strip had always been normal, which is to say they had always been afraid. He came through the door and found a store that was not empty. Jake was at the counter. Ridge was on the floor between the counter and the door. Detective Hartley was in the back room with a recorder running, and at least 5 of the shop owners from the strip had found reasons to be in Mireille's store in the last 20 minutes. Mrs. Choi with her notebook, Mr. Bake with his phone, 3 others who had decided in the 48 hours since Jake had sat in their shops that they were done being alone in this. Dez looked at the room and understood that the room had changed, and he had enough experience in how things go to know that the next few minutes were going to go badly for him. He tried the script anyway, because it was the only script he had, and Kane had told him to collect, and disappointing Kane had consequences that Dez could not presently afford. He said what he'd been sent to say, and Mireille Sung, who had been standing behind the counter with the absolute steadiness of a woman who has held her ground in this exact doorway for 35 years and does not intend to be moved by anyone, looked at Dez and said the thing that stopped the room. He threatened to hurt Danny. 5 words. Her voice was the same as it always was, level, unhurried, the way she said everything. She was not performing grief or outrage. She was correcting the record, the way a person who has worked at a counter for a long time corrects the record, plainly, without drama, because the truth is the truth and it will be heard eventually. And everyone in that room heard it. The detective with the recorder running, the neighbors who had come, Jake who knew exactly who Danny was, the thing Vincent Kane had held over this woman in the last weeks. When she had refused again, when he had escalated, when the physical grab had not broken her, was a threat against her deployed grandson. He had reached across the ocean to threaten a Marine corporal, to frighten his grandmother. And it had not frightened her, but she had carried it alone, and now it was in the room where the recorder was running. And Dez knew, watching Jake's face change very slightly in the way that faces change when a man hears the wrong thing said about someone under his protection, that this Friday was a categorically different Friday from every other Friday. Jake spoke last, and he spoke without raising his voice, because that is the kind of man he is, the kind whose authority is not in volume. He laid it out in order, for Dez and for the detective and for the record. The 8 months, the amounts, the broken windows, the 2 burglaries, the threatening texts, the rotating crew, the collector who had come to a shop owner's home when a payment was missed, the specific threat against an active duty Marine that had just been stated in front of a recording device. He said he hoped Dez would make the cooperative choice in the next 30 seconds and that the detective in the back room was there to facilitate whatever choice that was. Ridge had not moved from the space between the door and the counter and did not move until Dez had made his cooperative choice and the detective had made his appearance and the situation was settled beyond doubt. What happened over the following weeks moved through that strip the way good news moves through a tight community. Quickly, because tight communities have been waiting for it. Vincent Kane was charged on counts that would not reduce quietly And Dez's cooperation added detail that reached Kane's other operations in other parts of the city, and Detective Hartley's career improved significantly. The business owners who had paid in silence found that testifying together was a different proposition than testifying alone, and they testified together, and the district attorney's case was thorough and did not collapse. The Strip had a meeting in Miray's store because it was the right place, and the thing that had been unspoken for 8 months became the thing that was spoken, and being spoken made it smaller, and being shared made it survivable, and Mrs. Choi's notebook became an exhibit rather than a private act of courage in the dark. The Korean church 2 blocks over organized a Watch the Businesses program, and the pastor, who had known for months that something was wrong and had not known how to help it, was glad to finally be useful. There are turns in a life that feel less like coincidence than like arrangement, that the man who most needed the walk that evening was the one with a dog that could read what was coming around the corner, and that the woman who most needed him to show up had been feeding him out of her store for 5 months like a person who knew, somehow, that this was an arrangement that would eventually matter. A person does not have to know the word for it to feel it settle. Danny Sun came home on leave in February and walked into his grandmother's store, and she put food on the counter and told him the whole story, because he was home now and he could carry it. And he called Jake that evening and they talked for an hour about things neither of them had been able to say to anyone else. Danny sent Ridge a smoked beef bone in the mail the following week, which is not protocol and which Jake allowed. Miray told Jake that Jae-won would have liked him, which she said the way she said everything, matter-of-factly, with no ceremony, and which meant more to Jake than any commendation he had received in 15 years of service. On most evenings now, there is a man who walks the West Side Strip at dusk, and a brindled dog at his side, and the lights of the shops are on, and the smell of grilled meat comes from the vents. And a woman in a grocery looks up when they pass and raises her hand once, the way you raise your hand to someone who belongs in the neighborhood, because he does. What Jake Holloway did was not extraordinary in the way we usually mean the word. He walked the route he already walked, and he came around a corner because his dog told him to. And he stayed when he could have left, and he sat in the shops and asked the questions that let other people tell the truth they had been keeping to themselves. He had a particular kind of damage that made him a particular kind of useful in exactly this kind of wrong. And Miray Sung, who had been feeding him without comment for 5 months, may have understood that before he did. She had not let go of her bag. She had not let go of much of anything in 35 years on that strip. That was worth holding on to. She was simply still there when someone finally came around the right corner at the right time. This story is for every business owner who has ever opened their doors every morning knowing something was wrong and not having anyone to tell, and for everyone who has stayed in a neighborhood when it would have been easier to leave. Is there a place in your life, a block, a shop, a neighborhood that someone held together through sheer stubbornness and will that might not be there without them? Tell me about it in the comments below. And if you know a place like Sung's Market, maybe go in and say thank you. Every story on this channel was about the people who stay and the ones who show up for them. If that means something to you, subscribe so you're here for the next one. There are more of these stories to tell. And before you go, which moment in this one stayed with you the most? I'll see you in the comments.